This is Stephen Nojiri, and this is a summary video of videos 1 through 9. We're also calling it the Too Long Didn't Read video. So as you can see on your screen, this series is about Jingunden, which means the imperial military tradition. This is a tradition that goes back to the imperial family and then into particular retainers, particular samurai, bushi, and this particular series is focused on the Tada Genji Jingunden. So this would be imperial military tradition that started with the emperors and then went into the Tada Genji family, or the Tada Genji sort of lineage. This Tada Genji Jingunden is interconnected with other systems, such as the Kusunoki tradition and other Jingunden systems, such as the Tachibana Jingunden and the Shotoku Jingunden. This Tada Genji Jingunden was started by Genji Mitsunaka, also known as Tada Manju, and it branched out over several family lines through the centuries. So again, starts as an imperial military art or an imperial military tradition and goes to Genji Mitsunaka, and then from Genji Mitsunaka it follows through his descendants over the centuries. It contains a type of teaching called Obo Shiden, which means the tradition of the great star, and in this case the great star refers to the sun, and this specifically is referring to the sun goddess. Within the Oboshiden, it is broken down into three sections: the great star, the middle star, and the little star. The great star is the esoteric teachings. The middle star is the teachings of the general, the commander, and it also contains weather and divination. The little star is for the army and or the samurai, the bushi. It contains all the teachings about weapons, horsemanship, formations, spies, everything that is actual military combat is contained within the little star. So the little star is all of the military sort of warrior arts. So little star are the warrior arts, middle star are the teachings for a commander, and then the great star is philosophy and esoteric traditions. We also looked at the bow and arrow and swords within this Tada Genji tradition, and we discussed that the bow and arrow are the primary weapons. They're used for combat, and they're also used for rituals. We specifically discussed the Tada Genji tradition and the Jingunden tradition. All of the Jingunden traditions have several rituals that use bows and arrows to expel evil forces or to create auspicious circumstances, etc., etc. So used for combat, but also used for rituals, and that the bow and arrow is considered to be specifically blessed by the gods as the weapon of the Jingunden. Swords come in the long and short set. Now this isn't the daisho set that most people are familiar with. It does not have to be a standard uchigatana and a wakizashi. It can be any long sword with a shorter sword. So it could be a tachi and an uchigatana, a long tachi with a smaller but standard uchigatana. It could be a slightly longer uchigatana and a slightly shorter uchigatana. It could be, it could be a standard katana with a tanto. As long as you have one long sword for a particular purpose and a shorter bladed weapon for another purpose. It can even be a sword and something like a kabuto wari. Again, a longer weapon and a shorter weapon. But these are not considered the main or primary weapons. These long and short blades are actually considered secondary tier equipment, and they are used for combat and for rituals. And the sword itself is oftentimes a ritual implement. So I also discussed that within this Jingunden, there's lots of religious and spiritual teachings, as well as history and lineage teachings. So, for example, within this tradition, there is a lot of historical religious teachings of particular swords, particular Tada Genji swords through the history, through the passed down through the years. And we also did a lineage series. So we looked at 3 lines of transmission. We looked at the Kusunoki tradition, we looked at the Yoshitsune tradition, and we looked at the Tada Genji material that interweaves with the Kusunoki tradition as it appears among Oda and Toyotomi retainers. So we looked at those 3 traditions or lines of transmission. Now these lines of transmission often interweave. So for example, the Kusunoki tradition, if when we eventually get around to looking at these more, you'll see the Kusunoki tradition interweaves with Shotoku Jingunden and interweaves, and then the Kusunoki tradition and then the Tada Genji tradition interweave. So there's a lot of interweaving. So what we tried to show was the basics of the transmission, and then in future videos there will be more detailed explanation of how all these lines interweave. But we looked at these 3 basic breakdowns of the we looked at 3 basic breakdowns of these 3 systems. And then we also wanted to make it very clear that these lines are by no means the totality of the practitioners of Jingunden. To be honest, we barely covered these 3 lineages, and there are so many other lines of transmission that either were only simply mentioned or some weren't mentioned at all. And that is it for this video. As always, these videos are meant to be brief, and they are meant to inspire you or to give you a starting off point. The material in this video is copywritten by me, so please do not steal this material. Please do not take it. Please do not copy it. Again, I hope it inspires you. I hope that it sets you off on your own investigations and explorations, but please be respectful.